Welcome to part 2 of my Shonen Jump Gold Famicom mini review. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, click the thing up in the corner or the link in the description. The last video had a weird mix of games based on obscure series like Okun Shinwa, sports manga, and Dragon Ball, but the games in this one mostly follow a theme. Big ol' muscly beef boys, starting with the secret love child of Mel Gibson and Bruce Lee. Fist of the North Star, or Hokuto No Ken, is a very popular series from the early 80s. It essentially kicked off the age of the massive tough guy manga in the mid to late 80s. While it has become a bit of a meme today, it was one of the few Japanese series to gain some popularity in the US in a time before DBZ and Sailor Moon. The animated movie was released in the West shortly after its Japanese debut and featured some great voice talent like one of my favorites, Wendy Lee, and even Uncle Phil. The manga made its way over here in 1989, being one of the earliest published by Viz. There was even an original live-action US movie released in 1995. I mean, it wasn't very good. But it was very rare for an anime to have this much of a Western presence in the 80s and early 90s. Another rarity is that the video games weren't overly localized. If you've seen my Dragon Ball video, you know what I'm talking about. But we got 2 official Fist of the North Star games on the Game Boy and NES, with name and box art intact. There was a third that launched with the Genesis, but it was renamed and heavily localized, with name changes like calling Kenshiro Aardvark or Arzak or something. Way to go, Sega. The first game, simply titled Hokuto No Ken, is a side-scrolling beat-em-up, because of course that's what it is. Why would it be anything else? Standard enemies flood the screen, but they die in one hit, so that's not an issue. The problem is the projectiles. Aside from a generous jump, Kenshiro is not very mobile and can't attack while in the air. At least not at first. You do power up as you progress. The game is pretty simple, but it actually reflects the source material rather well with all the ta-ta-ta-ta-tas and making bad guys explode. I didn't realize it until I was researching for this video, but this is not the Fist of the North Star game that we got on the NES. That was actually the sequel, Hokuto no Ken 2. It looks a lot better and plays a bit faster than the first one. Other than that, it's generally the same, just updated with more features. You know, a sequel. The next game that's actually on the Gold Famicom though is not like a sequel at all. Hokuto no Ken 3, Shinseki Sozo Seiken Retsuden. With a name that long, you know it's an RPG. While the first 2 games cover parts of the manga, this one lightly retells the events through the entire series. Not a lot to say about this one, it's a very standard RPG. If you're not a big fan of the series or don't like playing RPGs that are entirely in Japanese, it's probably not for you. Now I actually have some history with this next game. I played a lot of Muscle on the NES back in the day, but I had no idea that it was based on the Kaneko Man anime until I saw a random episode of Ultimate Muscle on Foxbox in the early 2000s. Once I saw Anime Homer, it all clicked. But how could a video game released in the 80s be based on an anime from the future? I'm just kidding. By this time I knew about the original Kaneko Man, but I didn't know why the video game was released in the US. It turns out Kaneko Man was actually huge in the US back in the 80s. Except it wasn't the anime. It was a series of collectible figures called Muscle, or millions of unusual small creatures lurking everywhere. This is something I didn't know until pretty recently. It's a heavily localized version of the Kinkenshi toy line from Japan, and it was a pretty big deal in the 80s, probably due to how popular wrestling was at the time. And if you haven't realized it by now, Kaneko Man is a series based on wrestling. The first game on the Famicom was Kaneko Man Muscle Tag Match, and from what I can tell, it was the first wrestling game released on the Famicom. You choose 2 characters against the computer or another player and fight 2-on-2 in one of 3 rings: normal, ice top, and electric rope. You can jump and punch and use a finisher by grabbing this flashing pellet. There are 9 characters to choose from: Kaneko Man, Terry Man, Ramen Man, Robin Mask, Buffalo Man, Wars Man, Ashura Man, and Brocken Jr. who looks like a... oh, no. I'm sure they changed it for the West, right? Oh, no. The second game was actually released on the Famicom Disk System and stayed in Japan. Kaneko OE Soratsusen is based on the Scramble for the Throne story arc, which was the final arc in the manga and really long at 113 chapters. They actually made an entirely new anime series just for this arc. Anyway, this one is not a wrestling game, it's a beat 'em up, where you make your way through levels punching things and fighting bosses. Why they made a beat 'em up game based on wrestlers is beyond me, and I'm sure that would never happen again. Anyway, it kinda plays like the first Fist of the North Star game, except you can suplex the bosses. It's really hard. Rokudashi Blues is a pretty long-running manga from 1988 to 1997 and is based on a Yusuke lookalike who wants to be a boxing champion. This must really be what high school tough guys look like in Japan because you see them everywhere. The series is mostly about fighting and the game is an RPG of all things. There are areas that let you walk around, but the overworld is basically a menu. The game is entirely in Japanese, but from what I can tell, you choose dialogue to determine what moves you make during a battle. And if that's true, then that's actually pretty neat. You choose an option and watch the actions play out with still frames. Being released in 1993, this game looks pretty good for the Famicom, Famicom, but unfortunately I couldn't find much information about it, so that's really all I have to say about it. Now this last game is not about buff boys at all. In fact, it's probably the least manly game on the Gold Famicom Mini. Coincidentally, it's also the most fun I've had so far. Magical Okun is a shorter series spanning 21 volumes, and stars this little magician wearing what appears to be a coat made out of munchlax fur, looking like he's about to attack my life points. At first I thought the game Magical Okun Fantastic World was going to be another RPG, but I was pleasantly surprised to find out that it's a platformer with an overworld similar to Mario 3. You use your tongue to attack and collect these eggshells, dumplings, I'm not really sure, but you get invincibility after collecting a certain amount. At the end of each level, you can buy items including what I assume is a 1-up, a bag, sentient shoes, and a puckered asshole. Then you play a scratch-off match game that I don't quite understand. I got all the dried out eyeballs and I still didn't win. What's the deal? There are mini games on the map as well, like this one where this guy throws dumplings at you from what looks like a takoyaki stand. Oh, they're probably takoyaki then. The levels and bosses get progressively harder like any good platformer, and the enemies are varied enough to keep your interest. If you like old school platformers, I definitely recommend this game. And that's it. I hope you liked this video. We still have one more to go regarding the Gold Famicom Mini. If you like anime games, check out some of my other ones. I just recently did a review on Battle Stadium DON, and I'll probably do a few more after that announcement of Jump Stadium. Check us out on Twitter, Facebook, and Twitch at CrashLove Gaming. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.